We've already sent an email, but maybe I want to go ahead and actually go and create a new item within that list. How would I do that? Well, I'll go ahead and I'll delete this action because that's not what we want. We want to go and create an item. So I can go and scour through the actions and take a look, or I can type item. And by typing in item, I have the ability to choose create list item, which is what we're going to do here. So I'll drag and drop create list item onto the designer canvas, and I'll double click on that to open up the action settings. So the list in which we want to go and use is going to be market update request, and that's the list that we're working on right now. You'll notice we got that warning screen. Basically, it's saying that the item properties are going to change because we're using a new type of list to connect to, the one that we're working with already. So our list item properties that we want to select from are first name. So we'll click on first name as a value to use. Now, title was already added in here. Title is a required control because we're using the item content type, and so that's a required field within that type of content type. And so what we can do is we can actually add a value here. And we can use variables, we can use item property information. There's a whole lot that we can do, but just as this quick overview, we're going to hard code some data into it. And so for title, we'll just put third workflow test. And for first name, what we'll do is we'll put Ray for the first name. Now, there's additional information we can collect, such as the GUID for the output, and also the ID of the newly created item. If we want to work with that later, we won't really be concerned with that so much right now. So I'll go ahead and click Save. And if we take a look again at our settings, how does this workflow kick off? Well, we have it set on Start manually. So we'll have to choose an item to actually kick off this workflow. And we can just use the item that I have for first name Sean. So I'll click Save, and we've got our workflow design. And what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and publish this workflow. I'll call this workflow new item create, and we won't provide a description, but you can if you want, and you can also make any changes you want to your start options now before you go and publish this workflow. Remember, once you publish a workflow, that workflow is live and can be consumed by whatever conditions you set for the start conditions. If you just save a draft of this workflow, that draft will not execute based on those conditions. Only once it's been published as a major version of that workflow will it execute. So let's go ahead and publish a major version of this workflow, which is going to be 1.0. Okay, our workflow has now been published, so we'll click OK, and then we'll close the designer canvas. After we close the designer canvas, we're brought back to our list. So I want to execute this workflow and create a new item within our list. I'll choose an existing item as we're using the Start Manual ability to kick off the workflow for Start Event, and I'll choose More under the ellipsis for that first item that we created, and I'll choose Workflow. And so Workflow will bring us to the list of workflows here, and you'll see our Start New Workflow has New Item Create. Click on New Item Create, and that's going to execute that workflow. So now we have our page, and what we can do is refresh that page for the new item to be created. And there you go. Here's our third item. So third workflow test, and Ray is the first name value. So what we were able to do is create a workflow quickly that goes and creates a new item in this list because we knew the column, the item property in which to place within that column, such as title and first name, and using workflows with the manual start event, we executed that workflow to write back to the list. So that allows us to use Nintex Forms and Nintex Workflow to quickly build out a new workflow. Granted, this workflow doesn't do a lot for us, but it shows you the basics of how workflow is going to tie together with your lists.